I'm Joshua Friedman, the CEO of 6 Seconds, the world's largest organization for emotional intelligence. For over 2 decades, we've been bringing emotional intelligence tools and strategies to the world, and I want to share that with you. Have you met a leader you really wanted to follow? For 20 years, we've studied what makes leaders stand out. Leaders who bring people together and create a high-performing workplace and make teams that are more than the sum of their parts. In this video, I'm going to share with you our latest research on what causes high-performing leaders to stand out and how you can use this to grow your own leadership or to support others to become the best leaders they can be. In the 2020 Vitality Research Report, we found that leaders with higher emotional intelligence scores were 19.5% higher scoring in their leadership performance outcomes. Leaders with high emotional intelligence are 7 times as likely to be high performers when it comes to leadership. So I want to explain a little bit more about how emotional intelligence works in leadership and why this is so powerful. In this research, for the first time, we really connected the skills of emotional intelligence with the drivers and outcomes of leadership. And we found a model that fits today and helps us understand why in the current circumstances, when people are really needing change as the highest driver of performance outcomes, how emotional intelligence plays into that capacity to lead and develop change. So let me back up by explaining the vital signs model to you. It grew from research starting in 2001, where we were surveying leaders and members of organizations. And every time we did this, we would go into a company and say, well, what do you want to ask? And after about 5 years, we had a lot of data from a lot of different questions of understanding how different organizations were working. And we've come up with this structure of how we really define leadership with trust at the center. But what's important for you to understand here is this wasn't our idea that trust is important, let's put it in the middle. What happened was that mathematically, from real organizations around the world, trust kept emerging as a central principle in the mathematical model. In other words, when trust was high, it helped all of the other drivers of leadership be high. And when trust was low, all the other drivers of leadership were also low. So from that data, we structured the model with trust in the middle. And if you think about it from your real-world experience of a leader who inspired and supported you, I suspect that you'll also find that you felt trust. So I want to dig in a little bit more to trust and the context that we're in this particular moment with our businesses and societies. Neuroeconomist Paul Zak has studied trust for many years. And he looked at the neurohormones that are connected with trust. And he built economic models to help understand the business value of trust. In an interview with Paul, we were talking about how we're in a state of trust revolution. You look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, and we see that trust in institutions around the world is plummeting. Trust in government is low, trust in big brands and big businesses is low, and yet we have this moment in time when people trust a 5-star rating, when people trust complete strangers who are saying this idea or this product is good. So we're having a shift here from what we might call institutional trust to relational trust. If we are shifting from this kind of structural or institutional, big brand, big entity idea of trust to a more individual human idea of trust, one of the things that tells us is that in our own relationships and in our own leadership, we need to focus less on the role, less on the structures, and more on the human-to-human connectedness. This also tells us something about brand relevance and how we can create brands that are connecting with what people actually care about. And during the pandemic, one of the things that we've seen that's been very interesting is that companies are taking a stand on particular issues that their consumers feel are important. And this humanizing of this relationship and standing for a cause, not just for business, is part of what's engaging people to increase their trust in certain companies. And it gives us an important pathway to understand, both for our own individual leadership and for organizational leadership, we need to figure out what people care about and get into alignment with them about what's important. The vital signs model actually gives us a way of defining leadership. Leadership is about building a context of trust where people feel motivated, they're adaptable to change, they work together, and they accomplish the work that's in front of them. These 5 drivers predict 66% of the variation in the key performance indicators of leadership in the assessment. Essentially, the leadership vital signs outcomes are: we know where we're going, we have the systems and structures to help us get there, we're moving forward, and people are coming along. So these 4 outcomes are predicted by the 5 drivers. Then the question is, what are the internal capabilities, the emotional intelligence strengths that allow leaders to do those drivers effectively? And we found something very important in the research this year, which is that the emotional intelligence capabilities help support those drivers, but the drivers also help support emotional intelligence. So when you're a high-performing leader using emotional intelligence, your leadership performance also helps you be more emotionally intelligent. In this study, we looked at our database with thousands of people. We extracted a sample of around 1,000 leaders, and we also took a second sample of people who had taken the 6 seconds emotional intelligence assessment, and we looked at the correlation between self-reported emotional intelligence, self-reported leadership capacities, and also leadership capacities as reported by supervisors, peers, and subordinates in what's called a 360 assessment. One of the first things that we looked at is which of these 5 drivers in the model are most powerfully predictive of the KPIs today. And what we found is that change is the driver that's most strongly predictive of the 4 outcomes. So when we're talking about change, what we're talking about is adaptability and a readiness to move into new territory and to bring people into new perspectives, to try something new, to adapt, to figure out solutions that we didn't have before. Now, all of the drivers are important, but change was a little bit higher. And this makes a lot of sense in a context of a lot of complexity, in a context of rapidly evolving business and social situations. People need to be good at change today in order to be strong leaders. So that's the first finding. The next thing we looked at was which emotional intelligence competencies are most predictive of this change driver of leadership. And what we found is the competency of exercising optimism is the strongest predictor of high scores in change. And this makes a ton of sense when you understand the definition of optimism. Exercising optimism, it's not about sticking a smile on it. Exercising optimism is the hard work of finding options, of finding alternatives, of trying out new solutions. So if you have that internal capacity to exercise optimism, which is learnable, you then become more effective at leading change. This makes sense at a personal level. What's important here is this is also applying in your organizational role. So exercising optimism is infectious. As Colin Powell said, optimism is a force multiplier. When you find optimism, not only do you see more opportunities and possibilities, but you support others to do the same. And you can see how central that is to driving change. If we can't see a path forward, if we don't believe that we're going to be able to get there in the end, we're not going to take the steps to change. We also looked at another model of key talents for applying emotional intelligence, and we assessed which of these 18 brain talents was most predictive of change, and it's entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is about taking ownership of the future and bringing people in to support steps towards that future. So we have a very powerful combination here of exercising optimism, which is about seeing and creating possibilities, and entrepreneurship, which is about bringing people in, aligning and engaging people to step towards that future. So change readiness, therefore, has to do with our internal state of possibility thinking, but also our capacity to enroll others in that vision. And that gives us the map to understand what are the skills of high-performing leaders and how we can step forward and be more effective today. We looked at which of the vital signs drivers are most supportive of those capacities to exercise optimism and grow our entrepreneurship. And the factor in the vital signs model that's most supportive of these emotional intelligence competencies is trust. When we have the capacity to build trust-based relationships, when we have the capacity to create a feeling of safety and connectedness, the sense that we and the people around us are aligned and standing shoulder to shoulder, we're going to be better at growing that optimism and doing that work of entrepreneurship. So we're seeing this virtuous cycle where these emotional intelligence capacities are helping us create change, which is helping us create the outcomes that we need. And we see that this leadership capacity of trust, which is central in the vital signs model, is supporting our ability to bring these emotional intelligence competencies forward. So we can see this connection between the internal work of leadership and the relational work of leadership. And when these two things are coming together towards a worthy purpose, we have something incredible happening, and we're unleashing a capacity that we call vital leadership. So if we're going to increase trust, remember that it's relational and purpose-driven. And when we increase trust, we're going to have a context that's going to help us apply and use our emotional intelligence, particularly exercising optimism and entrepreneurship, which in turn is going to drive our capacity to fuel change, which in turn is going to predict the outcomes of performance that we need to be high-performing leaders. If you'd like to learn more, ask us a question in the comments, and we'll share resources with you and help you figure out what the next steps are for you to build these capabilities for high-performing leadership yourself, with your clients, and in your organizations.